What the city is talking about. This is Montreal Now on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
This was obviously not the result we wanted. These are not easy times, and it's clear that I and my entire Liberal team have much more work to do to deliver tangible, real progress that Canadians across the country can see and feel. My focus is on your success, and that's where it's going to stay.
Okay. That is Justin Trudeau. That, of course, after the Liberals lost, would have been a pretty safe riding for something like the last 30 years in Toronto, one area riding, Metro Toronto. Jim MENNIE is on the line. He's over at the Montreal Gazette. I was expecting something a bit more from the Prime Minister, and I know when you lose, you can't get out there and sort of, spend too much time talking about it. I don't know. That kind of rings very hollow to me, Jim. You?
When ego and entitlement clash and meld to form the comments that we just heard, when Justin Trudeau continues to act as if this is all perfectly normal, you know what? I'm not at all surprised by this patronizing tone that he's taking, saying you're at the center of my concerns. And if there was any message, I think the voters in Toronto, St. Paul's, and indeed Canada are telling Justin Trudeau, let's get the hell out. I don't know. Did you happen to see Chrystia Freeland when she was strummed on this in a press conference today?
Yeah, she didn't look very comfortable talking about this at all.
She had the 5,000-yard stare, my friend. She looked like she was in total shell shock.
Yeah.
She was looking like someone who regretted she hadn't taken those rumored job offers to head NATO. And for a while, she was sounding like a robot that fell down a flight of stairs, and it could only repeat its core programming. We trust Justin Trudeau's leadership to lead us in the next election. But then after she was pressed on it, and justifiably so, by the reporters covering this press conference, she said what I thought to be a very, very telling. And I you know what? I don't think Chrystia Freeland is the kind of person who lets things slip. I think she still chooses her words very carefully, even if she's in a mild state of shell shock. She said, we knew it was going to be a hard fight. Well, that's very interesting because the last time there was a fight in this riding, back in 2021, the Liberals won this riding by a margin of 14,000 votes. So if you're telling me you knew about this, clearly you and the rest of the caucus know that the guy in charge is basically driving you into the ground at light speed. And it doesn't look like, I would love right now to be a fly on the wall, hearing conversations between caucus members, phone calls, emails, whatever, or in-person discussions. This, you cannot underestimate, you cannot underplay what happened last night. Even the Conservatives are gobsmacked by this. And quite frankly, Aaron, I thought they would hang on, but it would be by a much more narrow margin. The fact that they got, pounded into the ground like a tent peg. And for those of you who are saying that, if it wasn't for the NDP candidate, she would have won if those votes had gone to her. Yeah, that may be true, but the fact is, I don't think Jagmeet Singh is going to stand down in time for the next election. And I really have a suspicion that this idea that, what's going to happen is Trudeau's strategy will be to make sure the NDP voters will vote for him, will vote for the Liberal to keep the Conservatives out. I think a whole hell of a lot of NDP voters will go to the polls, and I think a whole hell of a lot of Liberals are going to stay home because they are absolutely fed up with what's happening in this country, what's happening for our image around the world. And honestly, to hear the comments like this for the past 5 years from the Prime Minister, who is clearly living in his own bubble, clearly living in his own realm of ego. And as I say, for me, the concern as a Canadian is that this country is being handed on a silver platter to Pierre Poilievre and company by someone who has no other reason to do so than the fact that he won't give it up. He won't let go because he's the boss, he's in charge. And, people talk about this idea of a legacy. Let me tell you one thing right now, Aaron. I have no doubt that 100 years from now, historians will still be talking about a prime minister named Trudeau, but his first name won't be Justin.
So let me ask you a question, Jim. On this NDP issue, I heard someone bring this up on one of our shows, I guess, today, suggesting that, the Liberals will look at this They'll assess the damage and then try to think, okay, what can we do going forward, other than saying to Justin Trudeau, someone else needs to lead the party into the next election. Is there, in your opinion, any chance that they go to Jagmeet Singh and say, hey, look, between the two of us, we signed a deal to cooperate. Between the two of us, we can do better, and somehow suggest some kind of an alliance heading into an election?
Can you imagine how Jagmeet Singh feels today? This is the guy who's been propping up this government for how many months now? For more than a year, with this this entente cordiale, not to vote against them on confidence issues, and yet here is this same party that he is propping up that is unable to hold onto a chateau fort, a stronghold that they've had for 3 decades. What exactly is it about this particular horse that you want to back? Because if I was Jagmeet Singh right now, I would be cutting all ties. I'd be saying, listen, there is a need in Canada for a truly progressive opposition. And I think the best that he can roll the dice for in next year's election, presuming that's when it happens, is to become the first opposition in the House of Commons. And right now, I got to tell you, there's a lot of number crunchers out there who, the aggregators that we talk to on the show regularly, who are in fact seeing their, the gears and cogs of the equation turn, and it may well end up that the Liberals will wind up the second opposition party in a new government. That is how far they've been allowed to fall under the negligent leadership of Justin Trudeau.
Can I ask as well, and I brought this up earlier when I was talking to David Hertel, this idea where pretty much across the board, all the pollsters got this one wrong.
I think to a certain extent, and, we've had this conversation before about other similar situations. Everything is changing, Aaron. Everything, all the givens that we assumed, and we assumed correctly because they always prove to be right, have certainly since the pandemic have gone out the window. The political landscape in this country, which you and I and many of our listeners will remember as being a constant, exchange between progressive conservative and liberal, with the NDP always being the country's conscience, winding up, occasionally the official opposition, but more than likely the second opposition party. That's all out the window. That's all changed. Everything that we thought we knew, and everything those pollsters, because in many cases, those pollsters and or those pundits will look at this stuff and see it through the prism of what happened before. All those rules, and I've learned this to my cost, but all those rules are off the table. Do not assume, which is why any other situation, Aaron, I think the caucus or the cabinet would be calling an emergency meeting, calling Justin Trudeau into there and saying, you've got to go, and you've got to go yesterday. And if you don't go, we are going to resign on that. I don't see that happening.
Right.
I just see a bunch of shell-shocked zombies who are forming this government and, parroting this catechism of how they have faith in the great leader's leadership, even though every single scintilla of evidence shows this guy should be nowhere near the Prime Minister's office. And I'm speaking just now in terms of governance, in terms of what he is and isn't doing for Canadians. This country is going to be damaged and damaged severely by his so-called leadership. And when I say that, I'm also talking about the consequences of having a Poilievre government in power for at least 4 more years. The good news is, Aaron, you and I are going to have a lot more to talk about over the next 4 years. The bad news is, of course, it may not all of it be positive.
Let's shift closer to home, Jim. We had a report from Olivia O'Malley earlier today talking about the situation down to Place Victoria. So there's an encampment there now. Then there was a counter-protest today. Police showed up once the counter-protest was there to just make sure everything stayed okay, and apparently it did. But the question again is, what's the city going to do about this? Because as I said, the longer it takes to do anything, the more likely it seems, borne out by them now having a second encampment, they are to just keep moving through the city and finding other places to set up shop.
The difference between Victoria Square and the McGill campus, I think, is a very simple one, and it's not some legal nicety. It is infinite. And you will recall, we talked about the last time there was an occupation there back in Occupy Wall Street. My God, it's like 2011. The city finally moved after 5 weeks because why? Because it became a homeless encampment. Given the problem of homelessness in Montreal, I think that process will be highly accelerated, and you will see that camp coming down sooner rather than later, not because of any ideological or potential criminal activity that might be happening there. That is completely off the table. I think you're going to see a lot of homeless people just sort of like tag on to that. It's going to go out of control. The cops will move in, as they did more than 15 years ago, and that'll be it. It'll be over. But the fact is, you're quite right. The genie's out of the bottle. Any group now apparently can set up an occupation on public land, which seems to be even more legally justified in Montreal to protest, I guess, damn near anything. And I guess the city, if it does not want to be perceived as being, cherry picking its supportive rights, is going to have to just bite its tongue and let these occupations go on simply because of I won't say the precedent, but certainly the procedural template that's been created with how they dealt with McGill.
Imagine the way you lay it out, Jim. Imagine so the homeless people start, and to your point, start showing up, and then ultimately that's what gets this whole thing taken care of. Isn't that something?
Well, I hate to say it. That's what happened the last time.
Yeah.
And I'm just pointing out that because, and listen, we don't report on them every day. We still have homeless encampments in this city. And sometimes the cops move in when there is a threat to public security or their own security. But I don't see how that process is going to be any different here when you've got all these people sitting there. And I remember covering the last occupation of Victoria Square. It was out there. There was some concern. But in the end, it was hard to say where the Wall Street protesters ended and the homeless folks began.
Yeah.
But all that said, it gave Gerald Tremblay, then the mayor, the pretext for sending in the cops. I just think this process will be accelerated this time around.
See if it's the same playbook used this time. Jim, thank you.
Doesn't matter.